We begin the news in West Africa, where the Nigerian Labour Congress on Tuesday night suspended its two-day nationwide protest. Labour, in a communique at the end of its National Executive Council meeting, said the objectives of the protest were achieved on the first day of the demonstration. Nigeria is battling rising inflation, food inflation, forex crisis, economic hardship and high cost of living occasioned by the removal of petrol subsidy, attracting protests in parts of the country. The presidency had engaged Labour leaders in a last-minute talk on Monday night, but the meeting ended in a stalemate, and the NLC insisted that a protest was going to hold. In the meantime, the Nigerian Labour Congress has described the administration of President Bola Tinubu as the worst in the history of Nigeria. Lawyer and labour rights activist Femi Aborishade made the assertion during a media briefing organized by the NLC in Abuja following the suspension of its two-day nationwide strike. According to him, the Tinubu government cannot intimidate the organized labor in the country into silence.
Solidarity forever. Solidarity forever. No elected government in Nigeria will succeed in intimidating us into silence. We reject all the intimidations of the Nigerian Labour Congress, and we ask President Bola Tinubu to stop, call its agencies and mad dogs to order. They should allow the free expression of the democratic Nigerian people. This government, in my own opinion, is the worst government in the entire history of the Nigerian people. When we consider all indices of living standards, is it devaluation of the currency? Is it flotation of the currency? Is it the price of goods? Is it inflation? Is it employment or unemployment? Insecurity is unprecedented. A government that has put in place policies that have brought about unprecedented poverty will only reap unprecedented peaceful mass resistance. Thank you.
In the meantime, Nigeria's parliament has assured the nation's organized labor that it will engage with the federal government to address demands raised by the union. This was as members of the Congress took to the streets of Abuja on Tuesday to express their displeasure over the rising cost of food, escalating insecurity, and the failure of governments to implement agreements reached with the union. Marvelous Obomano completes the report.
The protest was called by the Nigerian Labour Congress, and it held simultaneously across many states of the country. Members of the organized labor converged on the Labour House, displaying several placards expressing their displeasure. The protesters then took to the streets of the capital, chanting songs of solidarity. Members of the Congress say government has not lived up to its responsibilities, thus the rising hardship being witnessed in the country.
This is not just a symbolic rally, but it is a rally to signal to the people in authority that there is problem in the land. People are dying of hunger. People are dying of banditry. Insecurity is everywhere. Kidnapping is everywhere. You kidnap a poor man, you ask for millions. Where is he going to get the millions?
This is not the first time we are here. We were here before. So it's because of their inability to take action that prompted us to be here today again.
The chairman of the Senate Committee on Labor and Employment, while speaking to the protesters on behalf of the leadership of the National Assembly, assured that efforts will be done to address their demands.
We want to assure you that this letter will be discussed immediately The leadership of the National Assembly feels what you feel. We will. Yeah, we will.
We'll hold them to their word. We'd like to give them the opportunity to really see if they can act on what we have always been tendering. So we just want to hold on. Let's give them the chance to take our words home.
The Nigerian workers here have submitted their letter to the leadership of the National Assembly with the hope that the issues they have raised and canvassed in the letter will be adequately taken care of as promised by the leadership of the National Assembly. But the big question is, will there be anything different or will it be business as usual, ending up in empty promises? Most of the Nigerian workers here will be hoping that their efforts will not end up in futility as usual. In Abuja for News Central, Marvelous Obama.
Let's also tell you that the Nigerian Senate has called on the federal government to introduce food stamps in an effort to alleviate current rise in foodstuff and cushion the escalating inflation in the country. This followed a debate on the floor of the Senate where lawmakers urged the federal government to support the poorest of the poor in the country. Details in this report.
The debate on the floor of the Senate followed a motion moved by Member of Parliament Aliun Dume. He says the adoption of food stamps can help the federal government reach out to poor and vulnerable citizens.
You can Google food stamps right away on your handset to have a better understanding of what the food stamp means, because it's being practiced in America. Further notes that the reason for the above projection is not far-fetched, as several indicators, which include but not limited to ongoing conflicts across the country, climate change impacts, escalating inflation as witnessed in recent times, and rising costs of both food and essential non-food commodities.
The Senate resolved to engage the federal government, saying the introduction of food stamps will help government cushion current hardship being faced in the country.
It will be a historical achievement of this administration if we find a foolproof arrangement to provide for the ordinary Nigerian. If the American government can do it, then we can also do it.
We must, if we have put up a motion supporting this and sending it to the executive, the question now is, how do we achieve this?
If this system is adopted, whereby I'm a beneficiary of this and I have my stamp, which I will present at every strategic location that have been identified for that purpose, and be able to be served, I think it will serve the purpose at which the government is trying to alleviate.
Whatever measure that's brought forward to assist the poor, the vulnerable, should be welcome, and this is welcome. The Senate is open to every suggestion, every initiative, anything, any measure at all that will help in alleviating or making life better for our teeming population.
In Abuja for News Central, I am Amadin Uyi.
And I'll tell you that the Coordinating Minister of Health and Social Welfare, Mohammed Pate, says the federal government has enrolled about 750,000 Nigerians into the National Health Insurance Scheme. Pate said this on Wednesday at the third edition of the Ministerial Press Briefing Series initiated by the Ministry of Information in Abuja. He noted that the Bola Tinubu-led administration will unveil a comprehensive program to digitize the nation's healthcare system in the next 2 weeks. The briefing series was initiated to provide a platform for public officials to reel out their achievements and notify Nigerians of the challenges of governance. Now, women groups and representatives of civil society organizations led by the Women Advocates Research and Documentation Center have appealed to Lagos State Governor Babajide Sanwo-Olu to reinstate the suspended guidelines on safe termination of pregnancy. The groups in a webinar said the guidelines are important to make provision for termination of pregnancy in cases of incest, rape, and sexual and gender-based violence. They highlighted that there has been a rise in the number of rape and incest cases leading to pregnancy, and that by law, these victims, including children, are unable to access safe abortion services. Following public criticism, the Lagos State government suspended the guideline exactly 1 week after its launch on June 29, 2022. In her remarks, the founding director of the center, Bola Tinubu-led, emphasized the need for the government to prioritize women's health, rights and lives, despite the sentiments that may surround the matter. To discuss this, we are joined by Wemimo Adewuni, Media and Communications Manager, Women Advocates Research and Documentation Center. Thank you so much for joining us on the news.
Thank you for having me.
So aside public criticisms, were there other primary reasons behind the suspension of the guidelines for safe termination of pregnancy by the Lagos State government?
No, we have no clear indications, but we believe that the suspension rode on the elections, the pre-election sentiments that religious persons were able to write to influence the governor. Remember, the governor himself has signed the guidelines, and the guidelines were created by the Ministry of Health alongside the gynecologists and obstetricians, as well also as the Nigerian Medical Association. So we believe it was the intricacies around elections that influenced the governor to suspend the guidelines. Aside this, there are no health reasons for those guidelines not to exist.
Okay, let's now look at the specific provisions within the suspended guidelines that address termination of pregnancy in cases of incest, rape, and sexual and gender-based violence. I'd like you to elaborate more on that and why it is considered important for the safety of the victims, that are actually mostly women and female folk, the girl child.
Thank you. So of the total number of maternal death, that's maternal mortality in the whole world, Nigeria contributes 10%. That of all the countries in the world, only Nigeria contributes 10% to maternal death all over the world. This number, when we track down, we see that unsafe abortion play a big role in cases of maternal death. We also did further down and found that there is an increase in cases of rape and incest, and of course sexual and gender-based violence, especially after the COVID-19 lockdown. We see more cases of fathers raping their daughters, cousins, incest cases and rape. And we find pregnancies coming from these issues, including gang rape. All of these many times lead to pregnancy. And as a society, we're actually very shy from talking about these issues. But women who are ashamed, who are already shamed for being raped, are then left to no choice than to go to quacks, leaving their lives at risk. And they either die or they have terrible health complications.
Now, you've mentioned instances of sexual violation. Let's look at the issue of rape and incest. What are the major rising or causative factors of this particular kind of atrocity being committed against the female folk?
So we work with a lot of partners, including the Mirabel Center, Mary Stokes, and so many other women-inclined CSOs and NGOs. And we see a rise in cases of incest, like I said earlier, and gender-based violence. The causes are very interwoven, and it's deep research to find out. So, at case level, we can identify economic challenges contributing to gender-based violence. Again, very significant was the lockdown, the frustrations from the lockdown. There was an increase in the reporting of cases of sexual and gender violence. Again, from these rape scenarios and incest scenarios, we see pregnancy. So most conversations end with the rape and the incest or sexual and gender-based violence. But what happens to the woman after the incident, when she's left to herself? What choice does she have if she finds out that she's pregnant after being gang raped? What does she do? Those are the questions that we attempt to answer and that the guidelines provide for.
Finally, before I let you go then, what do you think the government can do, or how do you think the government can now prioritize the health and the lives and the safety, including the rights of the female folk against such situations? Or if they get into such situations, how can we begin to help them get out of it or have access to healthcare services?
So elections are over. It's time to stop playing games. It's time to bring back the guidelines. And what the guidelines do is to ride on the existing laws, which includes the criminal law of Lagos. Section 201 clearly then helps doctors to see that they can lawfully carry out abortion services for women who are victims of rape, especially for women who have physical health challenges. Before now, doctors were careful because of the general law threatened to jail doctors who offer abortion services. But a woman who has health challenges, including heart issues, kidney issues, blood issues, who's unable to support the pregnancy, should be able to have access to safe abortion within the medical space. So we're saying that the game is over. It's time to roll up the sleeves and realize that women are dying. We need those guidelines brought back, and we also need more enlightenment so that Lagosians can know that this is now accessible to them. If a girl has been raped, she can access safe abortion services. We no longer need to talk in posh tones. Women are dying, and it's time to take the decision right now to popularize the guidelines and to bring it back.
Wamima Adewini, thank you so much for sharing your thoughts with us. Many thanks for staying with us. Now, the burial rites for Herbert Wigwe, his wife and son, have been announced by the family. A funeral ceremony has been scheduled to commence on Monday, March 4, 2024, at a hotel, Victoria Island, Lagos, and will end with an outing service on Sunday, March 10, 2024, at the RCCG Lion of Judah Parish, Isiokpo, Rivers State. The Wigwes died in a helicopter accident in the United States a few weeks ago. The former chairman of the Nigerian Exchange Group, PLC, was also aboard the aircraft and was among those killed in the incidents. But I'll tell you that President Bola Tinubu has launched the Expatriate Employment Levy to facilitate homegrown skill retention and technology domestication and to balance employment opportunities between Nigerians and expatriates. Speaking at the launch of the Expatriate Employment Levy Handbook, the president also said the aim is to close wage gaps between expatriates and the Nigerian labor force. He said it will increase employment opportunities for qualified Nigerians in foreign companies operating locally. The president warned that the scheme should not be used as a tool to discourage foreign investors.
I've been further assured that the project has the capacity of plugging loopholes and gaps that have bedeviled the country in dealing with security challenges. Movement of foreigners in and out of the country. Interestingly, this scheme will wield the dual fold of revenue generation as well as addressing the unemployment challenges and salary gaps attendant in the remuneration of expatriate workers as compared with Nigerian counterparts. I declare my support for the Expatriate Employment Levy Scheme, and I will continue to encourage the operators, practitioners of the immigration matters and expatriate quotas, but don't use it as a
But I'll tell you that a political crisis talks called by Senegal's President Macky Sall on Tuesday advocated the head of state to remain in office beyond the end of his term on April 2 until his successor is installed. This was suggested by 6 National Forum participants. The participants in the National Dialogue said there was a broad consensus in favor of the move, despite the opposition of a number of political and civil society actors to such an extension. The conclusions go firmly against the view of a widespread political and civic movement which is demanding the poll to be held before April 2.
C'est que la date du 2 juin a été la bonne date retenue par 99% des intervenants parce qu'on tient compte de l'hivernage. Il faut qu'on fasse l'élection avant l'hivernage. C'est le mois de juillet qu'il pleut au Sénégal. Ensuite, il y a les mois de carême, aussi bien chez les chrétiens que chez les musulmans. Et puis, il y a des délais à respecter. De 80 jours, on est dans les délais.
En fait, les débats ont tourné autour de la question de l'après 2 avril. Et de l'après 2 avril, la position la plus répandue est celle qui consiste à retenir que le président de la République ne peut pas quitter ses fonctions après le 2 avril. Et là, on s'est fondé sur l'alinéa 2 de l'article 36 de la Constitution, qui dit que le président en exercice reste en fonction jusqu'à l'installation du président nouvellement élu. Donc là, je pense que c'est assez clair et que l'idée la plus répandue est que cette disposition-là suffit pour justifier que le président de la République reste en fonction après le 2 avril.
Par conséquent, la décision, en tout cas le consensus s'est dégagé autour du principe de maintenir les 19 qui sont déjà validés par le Conseil constitutionnel, avec bien évidemment la possibilité de rouvrir le contrôle des dossiers, parce qu'aujourd'hui il y a une suspicion sur ces 19 de binationaux. De la même manière également, les candidats qui se disent spoliés, donc du coup qui avaient des problèmes de parrainage qu'on puisse...
We now tell you that Guinea's ruling military junta has appointed a new prime minister 8 days after dissolving the previous government. This comes as the capital, Conakry, was paralyzed by the ongoing general strike. Protesters are demanding the release of a detained union leader, as well as lower food prices, an end to media censorship, and improved living conditions for civil servants. In a televised address late on Tuesday, a spokesman for junta leader General Mamadi Doumbouya said Amadou Oriba, an economist, is named prime minister and head of government. The spokesman said Oriba's main task will be to diffuse tensions with the 13 unions that called the strike that began on Monday.
Amadou Oriba, économiste, est nommé Premier ministre, chef du gouvernement.
We now head to the east, where hundreds of displaced people have been waiting for humanitarian aid and walking through the streets in a town in northwest Mozambique, a region where tens of thousands have been driven from their homes by a wave of terrorist attacks. Mozambique's government has confirmed the attacks in the restive north, but rejected calls for a state of emergency. The UN Migration Agency has put the numbers fleeing attacks from Makomia, Chode, Mekufi, Mosimboa, Dapraya, and Muidumbe at over 71,500 between December 22 and February 25.
Eu vi as pessoas estavam lá com armas, com cadanas e queimaram lá carro, queimaram lá. Esse carro que estava, essa pessoa estava a queimar esse carro lá, nós fugimos ali mesmo, esse fumo que estava certo. Deixamos ali mesmo, era no dia 20 lá, fugimos para cá. Sim, até cortamos o frango, o cara tremia. Sim, há uma semana que nem comer nada.
In Central Africa, several people have been killed in an attack on the office of Chad's ANSE Internal Security Agency in the capital, N'Djamena. The government blamed the overnight assault on activists from the opposition Socialist Party Without Borders, headed by Yaya Dilo. The government also said the situation is now completely under control and the perpetrators have been arrested or are being sought and will be prosecuted. It said the attack came after a party member was arrested and accused of assassination attempt against the president of the Supreme Court. Dilo is a fierce opponent of Chad's transitional president, his cousin, Mahamat Idris Deby Itno. He announced the attack against the Supreme Court president as staged. South Africa Minister of Environment Barbara Creecy says KwaZulu-Natal province carried the brunt of rhino poaching in 2023 as the strain increased in the region, with Hululuwe Umfolozi Park withstanding the worst of poaching charges. In 2023, 499 rhinos were poached in South Africa, with 406 murdered on state property and 93 on privately owned parks, reserves and farms. This was an increase by 51 in comparison to the 448 rhinos poached in 2022. South Africa has about half of the continent's critically endangered black rhino population and the world's largest number of near-threatened white rhinos. Rhinos are hunted for their horns, which are utilized in Eastern Asian countries to make traditional remedies and jewelry. To discuss this, we're joined by Cedric Koitsi Nzemvelo, KZN Wildlife Regional Manager East, and it joins us from KwaZulu-Natal. Thank you so much for joining us on the news.
Good afternoon, and good afternoon to your viewers as well.
It's a pleasure. Now, KwaZulu-Natal has seen a rise in rhino poaching. What could be the main cause, and what measures are being implemented in response to the increase in the poaching, looking at the fact that there was an increase in 2023?
Yes, there was an increase in 2023. We've been increasing over the last couple of years. Mfolozi Park is in the central Zululand area, which is in the northern part of the South Africa, in the KwaZulu, near the KwaZulu-Mozambique border. And it has a significant rhino population. And as you would know, it was one of the original rhino populations in the world for the southern white rhino. But being a significant rhino population, it's been now targeted by the syndicates that are focusing quite clearly in Mfolozi Park because of the rhino there. We're mostly getting syndicates from the Mpumalanga province, Limpopo province, Gauteng province, that are focusing and coming down into the Zululand area.
Okay, so then tell us, what kind of collaborative efforts exist between KwaZulu-Natal Wildlife and law enforcement agencies to tackle the issue of rhino poaching in the region?
Okay, we've got a number of collaborative efforts. One is with our South African police services. Being an organized crime, we do have our selected SAPS, South African Police Services units that are involved with helping solve the crime, especially the syndicate crime. We also have with the general detectives and the Stop Theft Endangered Species unit, which have specialized detectives that are deployed to assist us. We also work with NGOs such as the Peace Parks Foundation, the World Wildlife Fund South Africa, and a number of other non-government organizations that assist us in not only funding, but providing the facilities and the technical backup for the management of the species within the Mfolozi Park.
All right, talking about these efforts, are there any engagements with communities within the region to raise awareness for the preservation of these endangered species?
Yes, there is. You know, the communities around Mfolozi Park are very, very aware and knowledgeable on their wildlife. You must realize the cultural history that the Mfolozi Game Reserve plays in the Zulu culture. So it's very significant, the role that especially the white rhino plays in Zulu culture. So they're very aware of what's going on in the park. Whilst we do have challenges that we need to look around human-wildlife conflict and so forth, we do get a huge amount of support from our local communities in terms of counter-rhino poaching. We've had a number of occasions when it's been reported that there's non-Zulu speaking people that are in the area and they think they're targeting, you know, our rhino, and they do say our rhino. So we do have a significant amount of support from the community, and they're very, very aware of it. And we do have a number of programs that we do run with them, yes.
So in terms of monitoring and evaluating these efforts, how effective do you think that would go in improving the efforts at stopping the poaching of rhinos?
And the rhino poaching is a very complicated crime to stop. It's a multi-disciplinary crime. So in other words, we're at the end of the chain. So we're the ones that get the poacher coming over our fences and into the game reserve to shoot the rhino. But you must remember there's a long chain of organized crime. So it takes a combination of effort to do that. We've established that. We're also looking at a number of engagements with the South African Police Services and our NGOs to look at ways that we can reduce the threat on the park. So in other words, the numbers of people focusing on the park, and we think that's where we need to concentrate on.
So in terms of reducing the number of movements on the park, most especially those who attack the rhinos, can technology be employed to help improve that efficiency?
Yes, it can be, and we do. The Shishlui Park is known as a smart park, so we're busy putting a smart fence around the park. So in other words, any incursion will trigger an alarm in a certain section, so we'll know if there's been incursions in that section. We have a LoRa network, which is a low data carrying network that carries cameras that's placed around the park. It also allows for tracking devices to be set up and thing. So we have a number of technologies that we've implemented into the park, and part of it is live. So the majority of our technology monitors the park live.
Cedric Coetzee, thank you so much for your insights.
Thank you.
At this point, we tell you that Chad will hold a presidential election on May 6th. This will end a 3-year junta rule when President Mahamat Idris Deby Itno took power following his father's death while fighting rebels. The 37-year-old was proclaimed head of an army junta after rebels killed his father, Idris Deby Itno, who had seized power in a coup and ruled the desert nation with an iron fist for 3 decades. Mahamat Deby Itno had promised to hand power back to civilians and organize elections within 18 months, but added another 2 years of transition. The end of the transition period was pushed back to October 10 this year.
L'Agence nationale de gestion des élections peut annoncer aujourd'hui au peuple tchadien qu'elle est en mesure d'organiser l'élection présidentielle avant la saison des pluies. Du 14 avril au 4 mai, campagne électorale pour le premier tour de
Responding to the rise of social media across Africa, election officials are meeting in Johannesburg, South Africa, to explore strategies for utilizing digital media to ensure free, fair and credible elections. This follows African Union Commission's statement that it believes it is critical for the continent to use digital and social media to improve the quality of elections. To discuss this, we're joined by Terry Selane, former chairperson of the Electoral Commission of South Africa, and he joins us from Johannesburg. It's nice to have you around, Terry.
Chair, for having me.
So there's a lot of talk about the inclusion of digital or technology into our everyday life. Now, what are the key advantages of enhancing and using digital, including social media, for elections?
Digital technology and social media in particular play a critical role in terms of disseminating information instantly to the electorate. So the electoral commissions play an important role, and they use the social media to basically make sure that the electorate is familiar with electoral processes, and they're also familiar with the things that needs to be done when they go to the polls on the day of the polls.
So does that mean that the digital and social media platforms can help increase voter engagements and participation in elections?
Definitely, it will. As you may be aware that particularly young people, most of them are in these platforms. They are on Twitter, they are on TikTok, they are on Facebook and Instagram. And it is therefore important to reach them in platforms where they are available. So if you want to have more young people participating in the electoral processes, it is important that we reach them in platforms where they are available. And thus far, as I've indicated, the kind of the platforms that are there in social media are very important in terms of giving us access to young people and to make sure that they participate in the electoral process.
Okay, we know how conservative activities, advertisements and jingles have gone in trying to make election appealing to the younger population in a particular environment or in Africa. Now, what kind of innovative ideas can come into play to help reach out to a diverse audience, mostly comprising of the youth, when it comes to election, for them particularly to participate in this particular exercise?
Well, the traditional methodologies that are used by the political parties and electoral commissions over the years have not really worked in terms of getting more and more young people participating. If you look at the numbers of young people participating in the electoral process all over the African continent, you'd find that they are very, very few. So it means that the electoral commissions have got to find a dynamic way of reaching them through social media. They've got to find a language that is appealing to them, a language that is consistent with the language that young people use when they are on social media. So those are some of the innovative ways that they can use in order to try to make sure that they can attract as many young people as possible. They've got to obviously, reach them in those platforms, but also construct the messages in such a manner that it can be appealing to young people.
Now, the underlying factor for this is to ensure that elections are free, fair and credible. So what strategies can be implemented to leverage social media and ensure that the processes and the attendant results are transparent?
That's why now, in order to be able to deal with that particular aspect, there is this framework that has been developed. That framework, essentially, it's aimed at trying to make sure that you do not have social media being used for misinformation and for disinformation. It becomes important, therefore, to find a framework of some sort that will actually make it much more easier for the electoral commissions to be able to communicate with the electorate without the negative effect of social media, which is that of misinformation and disinformation.
Terry Slane, thank you so much for sharing your thoughts with us.
Thank you very much for having me.
Looking at stories from other continents, we tell you that the United States President Joe Biden has won Michigan's Democratic presidential primary comfortably, despite a significant protest vote over his stance towards the war in Gaza. Activists have spent recent weeks urging Democrats to vote uncommitted, and tens of thousands chose to do so. The U.S. is an ally of Israel, providing it with billions of dollars in military aid. Earlier this month, the U.S. vetoed a UN resolution calling for an immediate ceasefire in Gaza while proposing a draft of its own urging a temporary ceasefire. Now, the U.S. position has angered many, including in Biden's own party, who wants the president to take a stronger stance against Israel's military campaign. In the meantime, the White House says the United States would not send troops to fight in Ukraine, and this comes after French President Emmanuel Macron refused to rule out the dispatch of Western forces. National Security Council spokeswoman Adrienne Watson said in a statement that President Joe Biden has been clear that the U.S. will not send troops to fight in Ukraine. However, the National Security Council spokesman John Kirby told reporters that the only U.S. military personnel in Ukraine were with the American embassy in Kiev doing important work on the accountability of weapons provided to Ukraine. We talk business now. The Central Bank of Nigeria has raised its benchmark interest rate to a record 22.75% and increased the cash reserve ratio to 45% in an effort to combat inflation and stabilize forex markets. These measures are intended to control inflation and stabilize the financial landscape, although they may slow economic growth. NPR increased by 4% or 400 basis points to 22.75% from 18.75%. Cash reserve ratio has also been increased to 45% from 32%. The asymmetric window has been increased to plus 100 over minus 700 from plus 100 over minus 300. Finally, the liquidity ratio was maintained. Oladipo Ajayi, head fixed income and FX at Chapel Hill Denham Securities, discussed the potential impact of these changes on the financial intermediation role of the banks in the Nigerian economy. On the show, Business Edge.
It will have negative impact on businesses. And I think I've said it on the show earlier in the year, that if businesses that want to come to the markets and raise money, the best time to do that is the month of January. Because we know that by February, when the Monetary Policy Committee will sit, there will be a bit aggressive. And we know that will also impact on the market. And also, you would have seen more like a poll guidance in terms of action from the DMO. Where they actually moved the 1 year bills from around 12% to around 19%. And that already gives you an effective yield of about 23.4 levels. So it's more like a precursor to the action that will come after on the part of the monetary policy guide.
I'll tell you that President Nana Akufo-Addo has reaffirmed Ghana's commitment to swiftly finalize the external debt restructuring process, aiming to reach an agreement with private holders of approximately $13 billion in international bonds. This is crucial to overcome the crisis and enable stalled projects to progress. Ghana recently set a record by paying the largest coupon in a single day, totaling 5.8 billion Ghanaian cedis, that's about $464 million, to domestic bondholders on February 20. Financial analyst and investment advisor Patrick Bankwa shared some of the potential risks and benefits for private investors holding Ghanaian international bonds in the context of the ongoing restructuring process on Business Edge.
Good thing about holding the bond is that once they are restructured and government is laying down its process in line with what has been agreed with IMF, returns that they are going to earn from some of these bonds will be higher than what we have on the other markets. So that's one benefit to them. Returns will be better for them. Two, government of Ghana over the last 10 or 15 years has a record of also keeping to its promise when it comes to paying its bonds until we recently entered into the debt exchange program. So there's some kind of comfort or some kind of confidence that if you keep your funds in Ghana, one, you are going to get higher returns. Two, when the time is due for you to receive your returns, you're also going to get it. So that confidence alone is also something that they should be mindful of. Again, they should also account or demand accountability from the government of Ghana so that all these plans that we are talking about will be adhered to. If they find out that things are not going as expected, they have the powers as debtors or investors to call on government to do the right thing. And for me, because there's some kind of democratic nature between creditors, investors, and the government, they will have always a good chance to be able to implement their ways that they want to implement to be able to get their investment amount being grown over a period of time.
Talking sports now, Super Eagles shortstopper Stanley Nwabali has expressed openness to extending his stay at South African Premier Soccer League side Chippa United. The Nigerian and Chippa United goalkeeper gained attention after his standout performances with the Super Eagles in the 2023 Africa Cup of Nations, where he secured second place. His prowess has attracted interest from bigger teams in PSL and the possibility of him leaving South Africa for real. However, Nwabali's positive relationship with club chairman Siviwe Mpengesi is a factor in his desire to remain with the Chile boys.
I only see offers online. I didn't see any offer. To be really honest, I only see offers online. Maybe some of my friends, maybe screenshots they send for me. Hey, bro, like this offer is coming. But to be honest, I've never seen offer on my table, or maybe Stanley, this is coming. But I wish, sometimes when it's rumors, to me, I wish all rumors to come to pass. To be honest, but to be honest.
And that's all at this hour. But before we go, we take a look at some of our major stories. Nigerian government enrolls 750,000 into health insurance scheme. Family unveils funeral plans for late Access Bank CEO Herbert Wigwe, wife and son. Terrorist attacks displaced tens of thousands in Mozambique. You can send your eyewitness report to the WhatsApp number and email on your screen. Do follow us on social media. We are at News Central TV. You can also watch News Central live on DSTV channel 422, StarTimes channel 274, Avo TV and YouTube. Many thanks for watching. I am Lekon Onobanjo.